Giving you 15, 5, and 1 minute mark. And now everyone is here. So
I love that. Thank you.
Welcome, everyone. We have some people filtering in. We'll give it another minute, and then we'll get going. Okay. Hi, everyone. Hopefully you're in the right place. You should be in STEM+M, inspiring the next generation of innovators through making, tinkering, and inquiry. So welcome. We are excited for our host of our session today. Greg DeFrancis is the co-executive director of the American Precision Museum. So we're so excited to have him. And I want to do a little spiel about Greg before he starts. Greg has lots of experience, basically 30 years of experience in the nonprofit world in museums as nonprofit leader. And he brings to the museum expertise in STEM learning and teaching and formal learning and exhibit and program design and evaluation. He's focused on creating inclusive, welcoming, and impactful museum visitor experiences and STEM learning capacity building projects at the regional, national, and global level. So we're super excited to have him today. And he has lots of experience before the American Precision Museum. So I will let Greg go ahead and take over. So we're excited to have you. Thank you.
Oh, great. Thanks, Katie. So yes, everybody, I'm Greg, and I am now at the American Precision Museum, as Katie was mentioning, which is a small industrial history museum in Windsor, Vermont, which is, for those of you that know New England, it's about a half hour north of Hanover, New Hampshire, and White River Junction, Vermont, on the Vermont side, where Dartmouth College is, about an hour and a half south on the Connecticut River side from Burlington. And we are a museum that exists because we are in a 1846 mill building on a small brook that was the place where 3 innovators got together and created a new method of how you make things how you engineer and build and manufacture things with precision. And it was the beginning of a whole industry and basically the basis of our manufacturing today. Aside from all that, obviously we care a lot about manufacturing, we care about kids, we care about getting kids excited around STEM. And so we support them through a variety of KIT programs or other education, and we'll talk about that later on. But as Katie said, my career's been spent in working around informal and formal, at the intersection there of informal and formal learning, mostly with science and technology. And I was at various places, and you may see a few logos show up on some of my slides that you can get a sense of where I've been and some of the evaluation work I've been doing. So I'm going to start sharing my screen, and it's going to be a little bit messy, but somewhere along the line, I'm going to have to unshare and share again. But let me get this going so you can see the slides. And let me put it into presentation mode. Okay, so I'm assuming that you can all see this great slide, which you may not, one thing I did about this picture is I didn't take I didn't step back far enough to give you a sense of scale. So this is over the front entrance, a very large front entrance to the Denver Museum of Art or Denver Art Museum, DAM. And they had an exhibit about 5 years ago about play. And on the banner on the front entrance to the museum, they had this great quote, which basically is something that I think we all believe in. And I also was listening in on yesterday afternoon session, and someone was mentioning, I forget who it was, maybe Josh, who said how important out of school time is and after school time, and that it is so important that the work that we're all doing, that you are all doing with kids. And sometimes if we really think about it, and if I become cynical, we know that the really good stuff that happens in learning is when it's much more free choice and when it's much more kid driven. And sometimes part of the magic of the formal classroom is we somehow figured out how to kill our innate love for learning. And so that's my wearing my work on my sleeve. But anyway, people like Albert Einstein, super wonderful. So what I'd like to do, since you all had a chance to hear about me, I would love to hear about you. And if you could, in the chat, show in the chat where you are from and what your role is, and just add that to the chat so we can all see it. And as you do that, I'm going to try to figure out how I can see the chat as well, since I'm in slide presentation mode. Ah, there it is. So if anyone could just add to the chat there so we can see it all line right up what we have. And I can only see, there you go. Thank you, Cynthia. That's great. And Katie or Andrea, do we have an idea about how many people are on the session totally?
You have
37.
I'm sorry,
37 people.
37. Thanks. Great. And I also love the diversity geographically, and as well as the diversity of the work that we do. I assume there's some people here that are, coordinators and administrators and other people that work on a daily basis with kids, which is really wonderful. And Ben is here from down the road from Springfield. All right, so let me get to my next slide. So I'm sure you've been talking a lot about STEM learning and STEM education in the past day and a half. Yesterday afternoon session was really great, focused on how do we think about career awareness, and we'll be moving that into talking about that later today in this session. I'm breaking my session up into sort of 3 parts, and the first part is just an overview of, why do we do hands-on STEM? What do we get out of it? And what are we hoping for kids to get out of it? What are our goals? What are our objectives? What do we think kids are walking away with? And how will we know? And then I'm going to share some of the work, as well as also some of the background, a little bit of research evaluation work that APM is doing with its STEM kits and career awareness. And we'll talk about how we embed our career awareness around manufacturing careers and engineering careers into the actual hands-on kits. And then I want to give us all a chance to think about how we can do the same in our own programs every day. So that's the outline for the next hour or so. And so in the meantime, as we look at these photos, if again in the chat, if people would just sort of talk about what do you see in the photo here? What are some actions that you see happening? What are some of the processes that you can see? Why did I choose these photos as an example of some good photos to think about what should we be doing with kids in hands-on science and engineering and technology? Yeah, I love it. I love these. These are so good. So yeah, as you can imagine, most of them, not all of them, but I chose some of these because they really do show kids collaborating. And I'll talk a little bit later on, but I truly believe that the best learning experiences is that we learn as social beings, right? We are social animals, and we love to share what we know with others. We also love to learn from others, and the empowerment that learners have when they are the spotlight because they're helping their friend, their peer do something that they're struggling with. Like that is like so empowering, right? So we're social animals. I love opportunities where we are creating activities that require, and you'll see later on, I have a slide that says 3 hands, right? Golden rule, 3 hands, basically meaning how do you make sure that the activities involve and encourage learning as a social group and collaboration, which then we think about what are all those, like, whether we call them the 21st century skills, whether we call them, we were introduced yesterday to Intel skills, and we can all name our own little set of behaviors and attitudes and affinities that we're trying to create when we work with students. So yeah, that's what's happening here. So we have people doing what we think of the skills of science, technology, engineering, and math. We have kids counting and measuring and observing, all those basic hard skills. We have kids actually involved in some real content here, right? The picture of the young children making a bar graph with pennies. Those are pennies that floated in their little boats that they made out of tin foil. So they made their own boats out of tin foil, different designs, and the different designs, they just filled in the pennies until it sank. And then they actually use those same pennies to make a bar graph. So like pre-K, early elementary, primary grades, this is an introduction to graphing and taking away some of the abstraction of counting, putting into a number, using that number onto a graphical scale, right? So how do you, like, graphs are beautiful, but they're abstraction. So how can we take away one step of abstraction? But the point is that these kids were learning real math content, and they were learning real content around science and around ideas of buoyancy and float and sinking and floating. The picture above that with the young boy and the parent educator is they're involved in making a circuit, right? So and learning some content through that. And then we have a variety of other pictures where we can see both strong observation skills, strong collaboration skills, kids working together, kids doing experiments. And the other piece that I obviously put in here, and I saw someone's really noticed it, is intention and attention, right? These kids or these learners, because I have an adult in there during a teacher workshop, these learners are like, they are in the zone. They're focused. And here's the thing, other than the teacher workshop and the student that is looking at the dry ice in the bottom left corner, everything else here is free choice, right? These kids did not need to be doing this. They could have been outside playing in recess, or they could have been somewhere else, in this case, in a science center, in a museum. So yet they were totally sucked in. All right, so let's think about a few ideas about what I think are some criteria, some of my design principles around a good hands-on activity. Before I do that, though, I just want to, we all have our own jargon, and our jargon is all fine, and we all make our own definitions. And we all trip up over these definitions at times. So from my perspective, right, here's some of my definitions that I think of when I think of some of the different words and the different activities that we're engaging learners in around STEM. So I think of inquiry, and I think of engineering, and then I think of tinkering, and bear with me, then I think of making, right? And there's all this, Venn diagram overlap of things, and one activity or one series of activities is going to have different parts of this, right? But in its purest form, when I think of inquiry, right, the purpose of inquiry is to allow the learner to construct their own knowledge, right? So my classic example of inquiry, learner-driven inquiry, is the kids at the seashore digging a hole near the water and filling it up with filling up their reservoir with buckets of water, and then taking out, putting their hand in that wet water and making drip sand castles, right? And figuring out the right consistency of water to sand and how much they have to squeeze it and make this beautiful drip castle. No one told them to explore the consistency of material science of water and sand and different size grains of sand, right? It's their own question, their own idea. And then, of course, they make a dam, and then eventually they put their finger through the dam and they wash the water. They watch the water run through, and they see how the water is carrying sediment downhill. And I'm sure we've all done this at the beach. That is their own question. No one said, hey, we're going to study geomorphology and we're going to study how we can make a delta. But they're doing that, right? So that is, and they're constructing their knowledge that, oh, water goes downhill, water can carry sediment, all that kind of stuff. So that's pure inquiry. If we think, yeah,
Sorry, can I ask real quick? Will you be sharing your slides? That was a question in the chat.
I will. But one of you will have to tell me how to.
Okay, perfect.
I'll just send it right to whoever. I'll send my whole. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. Thanks. So the other, okay, so and then you can see this little, I don't want to spend the whole, hour talking about this one table that I've made, but you can sort of see where we have different ideas, right? And one, of course, idea is like how open-ended is an activity, and who's defining the success, and is there a tangible product or not, right? But also just thinking about the main purpose. So engineering, real quickly, I just think of the idea of like, okay, here's a design challenge. Can you make a top that spins well, right? How tall can you make your tower out of straws, right? So that's like my design challenge. It's an engineering because they're going to do some iterations, right? They're going to like, oh, if I put the straw here, I'm only, 23 inches. What if I do this? Oh, now I'm 27 inches tall or whatever it might be. But so there's iterations, right? But there's some data that they're getting. Maybe they're measuring something. How many pennies can I put in the boat before it falls, before it sinks? How tall can I make my tower? And those goals are usually externally defined. I, as a facilitator, as a designer, as a teacher, whatever I may be, right? I said, hey kids, today we're going to make towers. I want you to see how tall you can make your tower. Okay, so I set the goal. And engineering, hopefully, it's going to include some inquiry, or it's going to include the knowledge that students learned, or that we, as professionals, professional engineers, use the science that pure science learns. So inquiry is a pure science. Engineering is the applied science. But then my two favorite activities, we all think of maker spaces, and we all think of making, and we all know probably that making is this huge, big arena of different things. It is everything from programming a 3D printer to make a widget, to knitting a scarf, right? To baking cupcakes, I don't know, using some hand tools to make something out of wood. That's all making, right? And included in making, I include manufacturing, the work that we do at APM, and many of our partners at APM are manufacturers. They're makers, right? They are making socks in Northfield, Vermont, called Darn Tough, that if you're a Vermonter, we're very proud of. So they're makers, right? Tinkering, on the other hand, is much more playful and much more open-ended. And it's the beginning of getting into making. Tinkering often has a product at the end, but the designer, or sometimes the learner, is defining what that product is, right? It often involves inquiry, and a well-designed tinkering activity, and this is why I myself am like the fan of using the term tinkering, because it allows for engineering, it allows for inquiry, it provides a product that a learner can be proud of, but it's very open-ended, and the learner can provide their own relevance and provide their own story. And a well-designed tinkering activity is inclusive and welcoming to to all audiences if it's designed well. And we'll talk a little bit about that. All right, so that's that. And if anybody has any questions, and put them in the chat. Katie, please interrupt me and let me know. Or if there's any comments that make sense that I should be paying attention to.
Will do.
Okay. So what makes a good activity, right? And again, we've all been teachers. We've all been working with kids a lot. And my own experience is really focusing on, I've had the privilege of spending my career focusing around playing with kids, mostly ages from primary grades to middle school is a sweet spot that I've been working in. And it's kind of cool because I just get to play with a lot of stuff, observe kids, help kids do it, and then even do a little bit of evaluation work on it. So there's and for a while I was at MIT, and a colleague, Mitch Resnick, is at Media Lab. And if you're at Media Lab, I think I think one of the definitions or one of the requirements of being at Media Lab, if you're the PI, the principal investigator of the lab, of a group, you need to come up with a really cool name and hip name. So at Media Lab, there's groups like Opera of the Future and tangible robotics or personal robotics, right? And then there's Mitch's group is called lifelong learners, right? And so the lab for lifelong learners is where they developed makey-makeys and they developed Scratch. So for those of you that have kids programming in Scratch, and there's millions of kids programming in Scratch, that came out of Mitch's group. Mitch has this wonderful, wonderful idea of what makes a good activity, and he calls it low floor, high ceiling, wide walls. So that's something to memorize. That's something to write on an index card and put it on your bulletin board. Low floor, high ceiling, wide walls. What it means is that a good activity has an entry point for anybody, right? There's an entry point for the 5-year-old. There's an entry point for the 15-year-old. There's an entry point for the adult. Think of it like a really good children's book, okay? Or heck, think of it like a Bugs Bunny cartoon. We know that there's Bugs Bunny slapstick for young children, and at the same time, there's some very adult oriented and level like inside jokes in Bugs Bunny also. Low floor. High ceiling means you can take the activity as high as you want, so it doesn't have an endpoint. Wide walls means you can take it in a lot of different directions, so a lot of room for creativity and a lot of room for personalization. So Mitch's work with makey-makeys and Scratch is a classic example. So many of you may know makey-makeys. They're little controllers that you can program using Scratch, which is a very simple language that first and second graders can learn. And you can use it as simply as like connect different wires to different fruit, and you program it so that each time a fruit circuit is connected, it plays a different note. And you play do-a-deer on your bananas and your fruit and your peppers with a makey-makey. Very funny. Or as a teenager, you can get totally into using the makey-makey to make weird sounds with your electric guitar, right? So the high ceiling, right? And people take makey-makeys in all different directions, but it's all personal, right? So the teenager made a personalized his experience and programming with a makey-makey by attaching it to their electric guitar. So just a really wonderful idea. We know that a really good STEM activity needs to provide opportunities for the learner, the kids, to practice engineering and problem-solving skills. We heard yesterday that what's the number one, one of the number one mindsets, skills that employers are looking for is problem solving. And we can call it in all different ways. And again, whether you're using 21st century skills as a sort of like a framework or Intel, whatever it might be. Even as silly as most of the tinker activities, or one tinker activity I'll show in a second or in a few minutes, is it's still connected to content, right? I mean, having hands-on science is still around, even though my focus is getting kids to build perseverance, to build to build the practice of being a good observer and a problem solver and and being empowered. They're doing all that because they're figuring something out for themselves. What the content is, from my perspective, usually doesn't matter. Whether it's playing with circuits, whether it's playing with programming, whether it's playing with kinetic energy, but there's real content there and a chance for people to figure something out. And that's what makes people feel good, right? So in this case, a middle school age girl is making windmills, and she's exploring, you know, different designs and how much energy it gets. She's thinking about the motor being used as a generator to generate electricity. She's learning about amps and voltage. I mean, pile of content there. Because I think a lot about engineering, and one of my definitions of children's engineering is that there's opportunities for improvement and iteration, right? So, and I've actually done, you know, sometimes I'll evaluate an activity, how good it is. And one of the things I'll do is I'll sit in a stool, watch, and as somebody makes a change, I put a little check mark. And each time they make a change, I put another little hatch and I say, ooh, that activity, that's, you know, that individual spent 23 minutes. And during that time, they made 15 improvements, right? So I want activities that can allow for that improvement. In this case, they're making rollways and chain reactions. You know how awesome it is to teach kids to use new tools, and you know, we also like to use real tools, not toy tools. And we know that real tools, not only do they build real skills, but they also build, right, the grit and perseverance as you're learning how to use that tool, whether it is a sewing machine, whether it's a soldering iron, whether it is a, you know, a really nice pair of scissors, whether it's a compass, right? All these different tools is really nice to use, especially when they're quality. So using real tools, building skill sets. And then here's my 3 hands. And when I think about 3, I just, you know, that's my little haha funny. But the idea is that if I can make an activity that requires more than one person, I'm going to be happier, right? So how do I have kids working together so they're sharing their ideas? And sometimes it's by the design of the activity. But the other thing, and I'm sure we're all aware of this, but it's also by the design of the space. So if we have students sitting at individual desks and we hand them each their materials, that's okay. Now they got their own hands-on materials, but they're all sitting at their own desk and their heads are down at the desk and look at their materials. What's better if the kids are sitting around a small round table, 4 or 5 kids around each round table. They're facing each other. They're looking at each other. So I may be doing my own little thing, but I'm noticing that what you're doing is like, whoa, I see what you did. That's a really cool idea. So not only do I have the opportunity to say, hey, I like your idea, and now the other child feels pretty darn good about themselves, but I'm now I can take that idea and I can take my learning further. Years ago, for those of you in Vermont, you know, the Snowflake Inn in Stowe, for a while, was always doing a lot of conferences. And the fact is, this is an inn, and it doesn't have that many conference rooms. And so I had a session, and my session was put in the pub. Okay, so now I had groups of teachers working together, and I had 3 teachers working groups of 3, and each group of 3 was in like a pub where they were in your tables that were separated by big tall backs. So the teachers from this school were sitting there working together, but they could not see the teachers from the other school or any other colleagues. So there wasn't any sharing across the groups. There was only sharing within the group. And I forget the activity I was doing. I think it was about inquiry, and I may have been doing like something with spinning things, like how do you make something that spins well? And they did not, in an hour and a quarter session, they did not get nearly as far as they normally do because there was not any transfer of ideas, right? There wasn't any sharing of ideas across groups. And the other story I have on that is I was in a school once and we are doing, I don't know, rubber band vehicles or something. And we are doing some designs and the kids were working at their desks, but the teacher had their desks facing each other, which was nice. So I could see at least one other kid, and each kid could see another peer. And as the kids were struggling through the activity that I did, and I often make activities that have just that fine line of a little bit of struggle, one kid looked across at his desk and saw what his peer was doing, and she was doing some really cool stuff. So he took some of her ideas and incorporated her ideas into his thing. And the teacher came around and said, Johnny, that's not your idea. You just copied that from Crystal. And you can't copy from Crystal. And I was like, poor Johnny. I mean, first of all, how wonderful. Celebrate the fact that Johnny is taking Crystal's idea. Give Crystal a chance to like shine because maybe she doesn't shine often. And here she's shining and Johnny's using her idea. How super. But on top of that, it's also, it like stops the learning process. And so then, of course, I interrupt the whole class. Say, you know, you guys, it's really good to share your ideas. In fact, the engineers at like Ford, they work together. And sometimes they'll take a Honda car and they'll pull it apart and say, boy, those engineers at Honda are Ford. Anyway, so learning both within a social group and across social groups. I can tell more stories, but I think that's plenty. And then this is a really curious one. And some of you may be savvy enough to know this, and it's a no duh. For me, it was a really big aha. And it was a big aha recently for me, you know, only in the last several years. So we know that we have this idea that learning needs to be relevant. And I think we often misuse the word relevant. It means that it's meaning something to the kids somehow. So this was an activity playing with cardboard. So it's a very much of a cardboard construction activity. And it was making a cardboard city, and each group, each social group, in this case, this was families working, and they would come and they would end up filling up basically empty street grid on the floor with tape, and they would put their own buildings in it, and put things that they wanted to do that was important to them. And so some people would make apartment buildings, some people would make houses, some people would make ice cream cars, right? You know, and whatnot, ice cream trucks. And this family spent all this time using wires because they wanted to make an LED light to glow. So they're getting into the content. And they decided that they would make a campfire. And they made a campfire, and when I talked to them, I says, oh yeah, we were camping, you know, up on Lake Champlain and at Burton Island, and we just got back last week. It was really great. So we're recreating that. So all this embellishment, right? The embellishment of like, they even have like the book that they were reading. They have their hot dogs, you know, that they are eating. They made their tents. They made it pretty. And I'm thinking, it's just crafting. That's just crafting. How important is that? Well, because they had a narrative that they're telling and a narrative that they wanted to tell, this activity was so important to them that they stuck with it. They stuck through the frustration of figuring out how are they going to get their LED to light, and how can they get more electricity to make two LEDs to light, and how can they make their little sign stay up and not flop over. So there's all these little problems that they were like persevering to. And one of the main reasons they are persevering through all of this and building that grit is because they wanted to tell a story, and they had a story in their head. So there's New York Hall of Science, NISI, has done some research around this, and they now make tinkering activities that are design challenges to help others, like help feed your dog, you know, design something that makes your dog, you know, that can feed your dog easily or something. And then all of a sudden there's like this whole story happening that the kids are connecting to, and they will stick with a design challenge much longer than they would otherwise. All right, how do we know this all works? This is just, you know, don't worry about this too much, but basically we know that when the activities are designed well, We can actually evaluate for some of the things we're looking for. We have different ways of evaluating for that. We can observe that. And it does two things. By making some kind of an observation sheet that we can incorporate, you can even make for your own space. Not only does it say, yeah, kids really are inquiring or they are testing. And with each one, you just like sort of, create some indicators of what that means. But in addition to helping you think through, is this a good activity or not, right? Like, I just always want to improve. I always want to have formative improvement going on. It also, if I have my colleagues use this, and then we talk about it, now we are actually developing ourselves as professionals. We're talking about, oh, that activity worked really well because I saw kids do X, Y, Z. It's like, oh, that's great. How can we improve that? So it also becomes as much of a staff improvement around STEM education activity, if you think about how you can make an observation tool, as it does for evaluation. But the point being, there's ways that we can actually evaluate, and we can create metrics that says, yes, this is impactful and this is important. All right. So putting this all together real quickly, I'm just wondering how many people on this in this session have ever seen something like this? Have seen this kind of thing? Has anyone? Katie has. So you may have come across these, and they come by different names depending on who you where you learned about them. And I call them scribble bots. Scribble, B-O-T-S. Some people call them art bots. Some people call them art machines, whatever. Okay. This is an activity, a tinkering activity that has a lot of legs, and everybody does them. Doodlebots is another great name, right? And a lot of people use them. And the reason why we use them, not only just as an example of a good activity, but to actually still do them, is because this activity checks off so many boxes. Okay. So for those of you that are new to this activity, what it is using an electric motor and like AA batteries, you get the motor to spin. You put a little weight on the shaft of the motor and you offset that weight. And that's what this little piece of glue stick is on the bottom there. Yeah. Right here. I'm not quite sure whether you can see my cursor or not. That is offset so that when the motor spins, just like having, for those of you in the north, when during mud season and we get a chunk of mud in our car and all of a sudden we're driving 55 and that one chunk of mud is offset on our wheel and our car jiggles, right? And the steering wheel shakes. Or you put your blanket in the washing machine and during the spin cycle, it's off center as far as its weight, and the washing machine starts walking across your basement floor. So you get a motor with a complete circuit and you get the motor to jiggle. Okay. And then you attach the motor to some random materials that you happen to have for, the students and whoever's you're working with to put together to make a body for that motor. And then that motor and that body is held up on legs, and the legs are markers. And so now you have this jiggling thing vibrating with its legs, and it's going to end up making fun scribbles on paper. So Artbot, Scribblebot, Doodlebot, all good. So why is it so good? Well, one thing is like, it's not a boy toy. It's not a girl toy. It doesn't matter from what side of the tracks you come from what color your skin or your weight, right? It is inclusive. It's silly. It's whimsical, right? It's like everybody wants to make scribbles. Cool. Okay. There's real content, right? Not only the content of how do I make a complete circuit to make my motor spin? How do I what's the deal with the balance of a motor shaft, okay, and an off-centered weight on a motor shaft, right? Big idea in physics. But also, depending on how people make their bodies, a lot of kids will make bodies with very thin cardboard and becomes really floppy. And that thin, floppy cardboard is absorbing all of the vibration, and it doesn't move anywhere. So now kids have to figure out, oh, I want the vibration not to be absorbed. I want the vibration to go down to my marker tips so that the marker tips then move around, right? So there's all sorts of wonderful content in it. And then many kids, and I'll show another picture, I think, in a bit, where they will personalize it. They'll personalize it with googly eyes. They'll personalize it and make it look like a pig going across the thing or whatever it is, but they'll somehow embellish it. And again, that becomes a narrative. And at first I'm thinking, why are they spending so much time embellishing it? This isn't science. And then I realized, oh my gosh, that is important to them. And it's helping them stick with it longer. All right, so this other thing, this is just crazy, some crazy research I did or evaluation I did on this. Let's see, come on, you guys, here we go. All right, so I actually was looking at these Scribblebots in two different places. I looked at them in a museum, in a hands-on science center. For those of you in Vermont, this is at the Montshire, and during the summer. And we had a place where if you wanted to, you can come and make a Scribblebot, or you could go and make bubbles, or you go look at the fish, or you go outside and play in the water park, okay? Free choice environment. And then we also did the same activity at a fair up in Derby Line, which is, a border town here in Vermont on the Quebec border. And it was a county fair. And our pop-up tent with the Scribblebot activity was in between monster trucks on one side and one of those fried dough on the other side. And it's a fair, right? And so now check this out. Kids had an opportunity to either stick with this thing or walk away. At the Montshire, where there's a water park right outside on a sunny day, there's other exhibits, they ended up spending 56 minutes because they wanted to get their Scribblebot to work, right? And even at a county fair outside, kids were next to the monster trucks. The average student, right, spent 35 minutes. So the point being, if the activity is really well designed, even in a very good free choice environment where kids can choose what they want to do, they can get totally sucked in. But it needs to have all those criteria. It needs to have opportunities for personalization. It needs to have opportunities for social learning. Needs to have opportunities for narrative. It needs to somehow be relevant to them. I'm thinking relevant? What the hell? How is a Scribblebot relevant to anybody? And it's like, well, they're finding it relevant because they made something that's scribbled and they're proud of it. And therefore it's relevant. And they're proud of it because after they make it, what do they say? They say, hey, Mom, take a picture of me because I'm really proud of what I did. Or teacher, take a picture of me. And there's a classic example of how this student embellished hers, right? And again, another, picture of how the student is creating his own design. He's making, he's using the little wooden pieces to sort of make runners and whatnot. All right. So altogether, really quick overview, some of the things that we've been talking about, right? That when we think about science and inquiry, we need to have places for kids just to mess around, right? And that is a part of the play. I'll show you a picture and a slide in a second, but basically it's about, we should be giving kids opportunities to do what scientists do, which is playing with real materials, not just reading about others that played with real materials. We need to give them a chance to construct their own knowledge, what another author calls the having of wonderful ideas, right? Like years ago, I was working out at the Exploratorium, and we were just a bunch of people that worked with teachers and professional development and curriculum designers and whatnot. And so we were trying to decide and define, this is many years ago, define what we thought scientific inquiry was for learners. And I spent, without exaggerating, I spent about 45 hours or 40 hours over a 2-week period messing around with rainbows and just being playful with a colleague. And we were figuring out how we can make rainbows, different ways of making rainbows and refract light and all that kind of stuff. And one night near the end of that, over, I don't know, we were on some pier and having a beer. And I mentioned to another person who was part of this group, I said, I'm so cool. I figured out all this stuff on rainbows and I spent like a week just playing with rainbows and light. And she's like, well, that's really cool, Greg, but like, freak, you just spent a week of your time doing something that you could have read about in the first couple paragraphs in any introductory chapter about light in a physics textbook. And she was like 100% correct. I could have read that in a physics textbook, but this way, I was the one who thought I was really smart because I figured out myself, right? So the whole idea of constructivism, right, is giving the learners a chance to figure things out for themselves. We talked about it should be around big ideas, around content. We didn't talk about this, but you all know that the materials are really important, right? What materials we provide is going to either make or break activities. We want to provide opportunities where we can then, have, whether it's informal conversations or a formal conversation about what is happening. So how do you make meaning out of all of it? Learning social, towing the line for struggle and problem solving, and really honoring the kids' work and struggles. And then I mentioned doing what scientists do. So there's an author who wrote a book called Doing What Scientists Do around elementary science education. And so I'm using her book title, which is why I put a little asterisk there. Good lessons provide opportunities for inquiry, science discourse, right? Talk, right? Practice all the different skills and attitudes, and also engage learners in real science content and phenomena. All right. So that's some ideas around inquiry. So how are we going to end up connecting the STEM stuff that we do, which is really good, and how do we connect it to careers and inspiration, right? Like, how is it connected to a career in Scribblebox? And I would argue that you can connect it to careers if you look at the Scribblebot as problem solving and engineering, and any engineer can talk about problems that she has to go through and the problems that she is solving and how she sticks to it, right? Or it could be the electrician, right? Or it could be a material scientist, but it doesn't have to be so tightly connected, because you're just trying to get kids excited and inspired about the work that they're doing is actually related to real work of careers later on. So at the American Precision Museum, we've been working on developing a series of STEM kits with colleagues out in Chicago called Spark Shop. And we have 4 STEM kits developed right now, and we're referring to them as STEM+M because they're STEM plus M for manufacturing. So it's our little cute acronym that we're using. And one is about exploring energies, making water wheels, because they're place-based. And so we're in a 1846 mill building on a river that used a giant water wheel to power machines. Another one is about measuring the world, and it's about measuring, just the idea of measurement, because again, this is related directly to us. As a precision work, you only know something is precise if you know how to measure it. So helping kids think about measuring. Making something that you can do over and over again, so it is accurate and repeatable. And then we're currently about to be piloting a new activity or new kit called on automation. So those are some of the kits that we have. We've had teachers do different ways of evaluating, both teacher surveys. We had about a 44% response, sending them out to 72 teachers that participated in the program. And, it's like, oh yeah, it's great. It's wonderful. All good. Very good. Okay, that's happy. That's nice. But what's really neat is when we had phone interviews and we interviewed again, it doesn't take a lot of interviews to get a good idea of whether something's working, but we spoke with 9 different teachers, and we got them to speak with us by giving them a $25 gift card. And we spoke with each of them for about half an hour. And during these interviews, you know, we got some wonderful quotes and wonderful ideas of what is working and what isn't working. And so one of these things is like, oh, we love this because you're giving us materials, right? Just stuff in a box that kids could use. But the bottom quote was really nice. And again, this comes back to designing activities that are truly inclusive. Regardless of the abilities of the kids, they're all able to do it successfully. It was very inclusive in that way. And I think we often dismiss the idea of how hands-on good inquiry is not just for the gifted and talented programs, which drives me crazy. Oh, redo that with the G and T kids. Like, oh, it's not good enough for everybody else. So good inquiry, good hands-on work is a wonderful equalizer, because it's often getting to work with your hands, building things that's not based on whether you've been you know, from families that have been reading to you since you've been in the womb, and therefore you have a high vocabulary and are a good reader. All right, so when we think about the STEM pipeline, and we talked about this a little bit, but we think about this continuum: inspiration, exploration, preparation, and connection. Our work, and most of your work, I'm assuming, as after school providers and out of school time, you know, program providers, right, is really at the beginning of this continuum. It's about inspiring students and giving them chances to possibly explore different areas that we can connect to careers. We're not doing the work that happens at our career technical education centers. We're not doing the preparation of teaching them the big skills that they need to go into a job. We're not connecting them necessarily with you know, doing internships and jobs, but we are doing the first two, and that's the way we look at our work. And so again, from our interviews with these teachers, we found that they really enjoyed the opportunities provided by videos that are connected to this kit, that gives us that connects the STEM kits to the activities. So, and just knowing that we all agree now, and I don't think someone's thought about this, but it's not starting at high school. We know that by the time kids leave middle school, they have images of who they are and who they want to become. So we want to make sure that they have the opportunities to have as many different possibilities as they form their identity, so that they aren't, you know, so that we're not leaving anyone and making any assumptions. We need to make sure that in elementary school and the first few years in middle school, that kids have opportunities to explore, all kids, a really wide variety of activities and therefore careers. So the way that the STEM kits do it is, in each STEM kit, there's a nice little box of the materials and the hands-on kits, but there's also a spotlight with a person. And the spotlight with the person, in this example, Sarah is an engineer in Illinois, and her work was spotlighted in the kit on measurement. And I'm going to have to do this. I think I'm gonna have to stop screen sharing. And whoops. Okay.
My name is Sarah Veronic, and
I'm just going to now have to open up a new screen share, because I'm going to a YouTube video. Where's Sarah? Here we go. Yeah. Okay.
material science engineer at Bueller. At Bueller, we make equipment that measures different important features of materials. So I decided to be an engineer in early high school. My guidance counselor told me I was good at math and I should be an engineer. And it was amazing to me how many different jobs you could have as an engineer. So I jumped in and haven't looked back. After high school, I went to Purdue, where I got my bachelor's degree in material science engineering. Basically, I came to realize that materials are in everything, and it meant that I could feel working in anything. Felt like there were so many opportunities. Measurement is really important to engineers. So our machines measure, when we look at something under a microscope, we measure things like grain size. We measure phase percent. That shows you how much of one material versus another material is in your product. We measure things like coating thickness. So whenever you need to put a layer on the outside of something to make it harder or stronger or resistant to scratching or something like that, we can measure how thick that is to make sure that it's thick enough. We also measure hardness, which are actually these machines behind me, that actually put a dent into the raw material, into the metal. And then based on how deep it goes, we can see how hard the material is. And these things are so important because the size or the behaviors or properties of these materials impact how the material behaves. So we can tell by measuring something how strong it's going to be, how much stress it can take before it breaks. It helps us measure safety of materials for cars, for airplanes, for medical devices. One of my favorite parts of the development cycle is going to a customer location, interviewing them, asking them questions about how they use your machine, care about what they need out of that machine, and then really understanding how do you make it even better. So I work with a lot of different engineering disciplines. I work with mechanical, electrical, software engineers. I also work with operations, supply chain, and manufacturing. I love that I get to work with so many different people. I get to work with so many different companies. I love the variety. I love that I don't do the same thing every day. I rarely sit at my desk. I'm running around the building, talking to people. I visit customers all over the world. And it's really fascinating to be able to see a factory making baseball bats one day and making electric cars the next day.
So that's the way that we've been connecting our STEM kits with actual careers. And I think, just to finish up, if you think about ways that you can do any activity and any activity you're doing, what are the people in your community that you can either bring in as co-leaders, right? So they are leading your activity, they're helping, right? They're sort of like volunteer assistants as you lead the activity, but then give them a chance to connect that activity to their work. And again, don't think like, oh, we're doing circuits and we're doing paper circuits, so therefore I need to bring an electrical engineer, right? Like, think about some of the big mindsets that we're trying to get. So who's involved in a career that includes problem solving? Who's involved in a career that involves collaboration, right? So if you're in an activity that's heavy in collaboration, you could bring in anybody and say, yeah, so we actually, in my career, what I love about it is I get to work with so many different people and we share our ideas, etc. So those are some ways that I think you don't need to have a polished video of a professional that connects directly, but you can actually have local people that are, maybe they're your, kids' parents or people from the field, and just make sure, obviously, and you can see that we're trying to do it as best we can. Think about, who are you showing, right? Who are you showing in the videos? Are you only showing a bunch of, people that look like me as engineers? Or are you showing people that look like the rest of the country as engineers, or whatever the career path may be? So with that, I think we're just going to about be finished up. I don't know, Katie, if you have seen any major comments that you'd love to talk about or discuss.
Someone actually just commented. This is so important. We need to introduce kids to people working in a variety of careers at younger ages. This is a good role model. This is a good role for OST programs.
Yeah, it really is. And again, I think there's a few. I mean, I've been doing this work for 30 plus years, as Katie mentioned, and I'm still learning a lot about some of the things that we need to incorporate into our work. And one of those is incorporating career awareness at younger ages. That's a bit of an aha moment for me, maybe a few years ago. The notion, like I mentioned before, like our narrative, and how important it is for kids to personalize things through silly stories. I saw some research come out on that and started doing it, and it's like, oh my gosh. So there's these things, but I think a lot of us assume that we can wait until high school or 8th grade for career awareness, and frankly, we're missing it, right? We do know that students are forming their identities. I'm a runner. I'm a music kid. I'm a soccer player. I'm whatever, right? I'm a hunter, right? And they're forming those identities by the time they leave 8th grade and enter high school. So we want to make sure that they have the breadth of opportunities that they can see, so that they can then form identities in the right directions or in different directions.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Greg. We're at time and this was amazing. I just put American Precision Museum link in the chat just so people can see the link to the website. And I'm sure you can find Greg on there if you want to email the museum or anything like that. But this was fantastic, Greg. Thank you so much for presenting. I loved it, and I hope everyone else did too. And thank you so much.
You're welcome. And then if you or Andrew, if somebody sends me where you'd like me to send this slide deck, I'll get it up there.
I'll go ahead and email you.
And you guys can all, for those of you that are listening, I'm going to send it as a PDF. And if you want to use any of those images or whatnot in your own presentations with your own staffs or colleagues or whatever you may be doing, feel free.
Great. Thank you, Greg.
All right. Talk soon.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Bye, everyone.